All right, this is Dorje and Meten. We're doing our podcast series, Marduk's Musing, which is on Mundane astrology and other, especially mythological aspects of astrology. And today we're going to share some charts. I think we're all aware of the recent huge transit in the middle of this month that was building up to a full moon, which is in a couple days. And that's the Mars Uranus with Caput Algol asteroid or star. And that's going to be the conjunction in Taurus. And that was this week. And we're going to get into what occurred. I know a lot of other astrologers have, so we won't go over any useless details, but we're going to share here our take on it. Dorje, you want to get us started?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mario. Let me share my screen and then get rolling for everybody.
All right, you're set.
Okay, and here we go. So, first of all, this week was a momentous week, I think, kind of mythologically for everybody. And it started off with the Uranus and Mars conjunct Algol over Trump's midheaven, and when that happened, then that was the event where he had his ear pierced by a bullet, supposedly. I mean, there's a lot of kind of like conversation out there about the whole thing, which
Sure, of
is
course.
typical for Uranus. Like if a
Yeah,
Uranus
we don't
event,
know
there's going to be all kinds of perspectives
because we don't know the
before.
details, and the details won't
Yeah,
come clear till later, even if they ever do come clear.
yeah, yeah. But this Uranus has been so active this week, and so is this Mars. Because right after Mars cleared Uranus, then it is going to trine Pluto. It's trining Pluto tomorrow. Um, and so that also is about like kind of like deep power and this shifts in power. And today Uranus is conjunct the fixed star Algol to the exact degree, which really kind of blew my mind because what we had today in the news is everybody woke up to a major worldwide failure of Microsoft systems, which
Oh,
caused
wow.
airplane delays and bank crashes. And if you go to Christopher Warnock's website about Algol in order to order one of his kind of like raunchy Algol talismans
I saw that.
for protection of like black magic and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Then he says in the description of this talisman, he's like, "Hey, you get this talisman. When I made this talisman, weird things happened. My electronics failed." And so we have Uranus, the planet of the New Age and of computer science,
Man.
representing the trillions and trillions of bytes of information that now exists. I think it's something like 400 or 4,220,000 trillions of bytes of information are being processed every day currently. I was looking it up earlier, and that conjuncts exactly the fixed star of Algol, and suddenly it just turns off worldwide. It turns off, and so that's something for the for Marduk's record books, because back in Babylon they put events like that in clay tablets when people were learning astrology. And I think like that Uranus is trying to it's trying to uh move out the old guard, the old political guard, whether it's the Republican MAGA Trump guard. I mean, he's what, 78, he's old.
Yeah.
Or whether it's the Biden old guard, he's what, 81, he's old. In
Right.
order to make
Right.
room for who the new leaders are. Um, and one thing you were mentioning earlier, which I'd just love to hear a little bit more about, is this idea of the Pluto being in Aquarius, and Aquarius being activated. There is now this kind of like struggle between the planet Saturn, which has rulership over Aquarius, and the planet Uranus, which has rulership over Aquarius, and who is going to define the Aquarian experience while Pluto goes through Aquarius. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. So me and Dorothy were discussing this, and I brought up this polarity because I've been thinking about the kind of myth. This was kind of seed of it, of this idea, was that, or coming back to this idea. This is not a foreign idea to any astrologer, to anyone. But I was getting into the ideas of like the ancient gods and or the ancient myths, where there was always a battle between the houses. And we see this played over and over again throughout mythology and throughout our modern mythology as it's portrayed in film and literature, which is the battle between two families, two houses, two different polarities, right? And you have this culminating in a sense in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, where you have two families that are attempting to make peace, right? By marrying one from each side so that the family can merge together and find peace and become one. And of course, in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, they both end up, the two main characters that are to create the bridge between these two opposing polarized families, they both end up dead, right? So it's this attempt to bridge consciousness. And in our myths, it's always met with failure. And so this myth is being underscored and nuanced now more than ever with our modern Aquarian age, you know, the particulars of which perhaps mean that Pluto is moving into Aquarius to rebirth all that will be presented and rebirth in terms of what the Aquarius ideals or realities are. So in of that, we have Aquarius with two rulers. The rulership for Aquarius has been called into question because the early ruler was always Saturn. So in the older Jyotish astrology and in ancient astrology, the rulership was always Saturn. But with the discovery of Uranus, we have you know, what modern astrologers have called a new rulership for Aquarius. So what we're dealing now, that we're all perceiving, is this battle between the values of Saturn and Uranus in the sign of Aquarius, for the sign of Aquarius, as if it's a war for who will express, who will bring in the zeitgeist of this Aquarian kind of Pluto transit, this experience that we're all going through. Does that make some sense, Dorje? Did I put that right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, and I love the way that you reach that, because as you know, the way I like presenting astrology is that it's really about creating mythic narratives that give meaning to us as people, as humans living through our lives, you know. Helps us understand the past, helps us understand the present, helps us understand future pathways that we might be going down. And so I like that you bring in the mythologies as you're describing what is going on right now. And I think it's really like we have Pluto at 0 degrees Aquarius retrograde. So, of course, this conversation is highlighted between the two factions. And like you said, like really, it's both. I mean, there are qualities due to Neoplatonic philosophical harmonies that Aquarius is always going to be in one way associated with the Saturn in terms of its like how it expresses itself. But then there's also the novelness of Aquarius, which is really hard to explain purely from a
Um,
traditional astrological
yes.
perspective. But anybody who knows any Aquarians can see, like, yes, they're like super stodgy traditional, but they're absolute revolutionaries, complete independent thinkers, and total individuals, which is very, you know, Uranian. And so you get both going on there.
Yeah.
And I think today, you know, today and this week's events really have highlighted that quality of Uranus wants to constantly churn the old guard and change and transform the structures of society. And so, in order to push forward uh, everything and everybody and humanity and what humanity is. Now, does that mean it's going to be for the better? I mean, what is for the better? It's
What
like
does that mean?
if we're like being, if we're being monitored by drones when we walk out in the street, and if you walk into Fred Meyer's and your face is captured by facial recognition software, that's then like taken, is that for the better? That's Uranian, that's like the Uranus quality of life. Um, or is Uranus like for the better because it's utilitarian and individuality will be appreciated and respected, and the common good will be considered what is the highest archetype. That's a positive quality of Uranus. I think the Saturn structures can be a little bit more heavy because Saturn structures are means of like, leads into Uranus and the age of Aquarius as being more about corporate control. So I see that, as part of the story too. And in reality, what we're going to get is we're going to get all of these. Just like this week, we got all of it. We got an assassination attempt on uh, the ex-president Trump,
Sudden
like
violence.
he got his ear pierced, and but he lived, and he raised his arms, and he shouted, fight, fight, fight. And that's that Mars Uranus conjunction. He just comes out of it like,
It's a great
some
movie
kind of
scene. It's a great
a
stage
great movie scene.
setup.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
great setup. It's a
yeah.
great, like, it's right on cue, right? Right on cue. We need a rebirth of our former hero, right? Perhaps.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And he comes out, and he raises
What a
his hand,
show. What a
Hey,
show.
what a show. And um, also like with the whole Biden thing, it's like, well, today Uranus is conjunct Algol, and Algol is the Caput Algol. It's the head of Medusa held by Perseus. In the constellations of the sky, and so it represents dark feminine power.
Yes.
And what do we have? We have, like, this entire group of Democrats and Democratic donors and operatives who are like, let's get rid of the old guy and install Kamala Harris. And so are we getting some kind of like, is there some kind of like dark feminine power that's like coming into the zeitgeist to overthrow the old white men? Like, is that part of the mythic narrative that we're seeing unfold before our eyes?
Wow.
I don't know, but I like how archetypal this week has been, and how the astrology of it has really just nailed the themes that we've seen in the news this
Yeah,
week.
beautifully said. So many avenues. Let me touch on a couple that you mentioned and brought up just to nuance. The symbolism and meaning of Caput al Gol is just it's never really presented accurately. I have felt even on my own Discord, we've talked about this. It's important that people are aware that the star Algol in the constellation of, I mean, it's the head of Medusa being slayed by Perseus. So it's the dark feminine being cut down, being erased, being pushed aside for the patriarchy. So what you presented is the eye of Medusa, right? The resurgence, the continued the almost the resurgence of life of the feminine coming back to life in contrast to how we acknowledge Algol, which is as something like you're going to get your head cut off, right? You're going to lose your head, right? That's the usual jargon around the interpretation of this star, that it's an evil star. But the only thing that's evil here is the denial and the destruction of the feminine. And so, yeah, so what you said is really apropos to the true meaning of what Algol is and what it really represents. Another,
I totally appreciate you, if you don't mind, just because that is so true. And like, really, what's Perseus do? He holds that head up and he defeats the Leviathan. Now, I guess a question is going to be, is trump the Leviathan, or is he Perseus in the narration of this myth over the next 6 months or 4 months to the election? We don't know yet. But that's like part of the unfolding there, you know? And yeah, like if all the oldest interpretations of Algol, if you go back to Egypt and you go back to the time of Samaria and Marduk, are dark feminine power. And so you hit the Greeks and the Romans, and they are like dark feminine power, that's bad. Because at that point, you enter a much more rigid patriarchal society that lasts through the entire age of Pisces. But now the age of Pisces is coming to an end, and we're moving into a more gentle, neutral age. We're moving out of the age of the Fisher King. We're moving out of the age of God and Jesus and Muhammad and all of these male avatars who are like fishing for souls and collecting them and have these like male patriarchal structures. I'm not actually a big feminist per se or witch, but I can see the narrative unfolding, and we have this unfolding of the feminine power as something that humanity desperately needs to work with again, perhaps to find some kind of balance. And if you were to ask me, when you look at Saturn and Uranus, a lot of people think Saturn, oh, the old man. But Saturn before, 300 AD was considered a feminine planet. And Uranus seems to have feminine qualities, and right now it's in Taurus, a feminine sign. And so we do have this kind of like feminine mythology bleeding into the stories we're telling when we talk about how the myths are unfolding. And to me, it couldn't happen soon enough because we've like our sense of manifest destiny coming from the age of Rome to the present time has completely derailed a harmonious integration with nature.
And yeah, and that's what it always comes down to, is man has lost his connection with nature. And that is the real key message for modern times, is for us to get back to nature, to find our footing on the earth, our bare footing on the earth again. I wanted to add to that, so much of what you said is what we're dealing with, and we'll discuss this further. Me and Dorje are planning to do a podcast on the Holy Grail and the role for the feminine as well as the masculine, and how that's representing itself in modern day myth. And I wanted to mention something prescient. Stephen Forrest wrote an essay last year called "The End of the Dark Fathers," and he was talking about Pluto in these end degrees of Capricorn, right? And this full moon in a couple days is going to be in the anuretic degree of Capricorn, thus signifying the end of the Plutonic cycle, which started in 2008. And because Pluto is going to move into Aquarius, it'll back up a little, and then it'll go in for 40 years till 2044. So it's really important. It's really symbolic. We're actually seeing this visually, the end of these old fathers attempting to bid for their last attempts at control. And it's really fascinating. I wanted to mention something, just to go back for a moment, Dorje. You were saying earlier, you were talking about the contrast, especially with technology in a relationship to what Saturn presents and what Aquarius presents, or sorry, Uranus presents, freedom versus control, as well as more nuanced expressions of that, where the control is mixed in with the illusion of freedom, or the illusion of freedom is mixed in with the reality of control, vice versa, and more complex representations of that. I wanted to note that what we have is even to go too, I don't want to go too deep into it now, but it's even more disturbing. It was evidenced, and it's evidenced in the films that are coming out. I mean, I just watched Um, as far as the story, the as far as the end of the Dark Fathers, the series, the animated series on Netflix called The Blood of Zeus is really interesting. That's a mythological retelling, what it shares, as well as there's a recent film that came out called The Watchers by M. Night Shyamalan. And
Hmm.
that film is very disturbing in its representation of a science fiction trope that just keeps returning and returning and returning over again. And that is an attempt to that is the idea that if technology cannot control humanity, then it will replicate humanity. It will make a copy of humanity and destroy the essence and the soul of what it is to be human. And it seems it can do that because without the connection to nature, which is our connection to soul and spirit, that it can completely lift us out of our grounding in the world. And what do we have in the next couple of years is we have the outer planets, Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, all moving into air.
Mm.
The next stop for Uranus and Mars is going to be a transit in Gemini. The next
Hmm.
stop
Hmm.
for Jupiter's just entered Gemini. Saturn after Pisces will move into Aries, so it'll move into fire.
Mm.
Pluto is pretty much in Aquarius in air from now on. And I think I covered it all right. Yeah. Yeah, and Uranus will be in Gemini. So an attempt, even astrologically, we see the narrative playing out as such to lift, to push humanity further away from nature, outside of its own body of self, outside of its own housing of its own soul and spirit and essence. And so these are very disturbing times in all regards. And so I wanted to add that nuance, not to cast a shadow over,
Wow. I
over
mean,
the whole.
we are right on like Mars trine Pluto. So like, yeah, of course it's going to get a little
Yeah, you
dark in the
said it.
room, you know. It's like
It's the Mars Prime
yeah,
Pluto.
yeah.
So one last thing to add, and then I would like to hear your response, is, this is culminating in the trine, and this full moon will conjunct Pluto. So we have Mars trining Pluto, and then the full
Mm.
moon on Sunday will be conjuncting Pluto. And I
Hmm.
do this on my podcast every month, not in the last 2 months because I haven't been able to, but I like to chart, I like to narrate and outline the journey of the moon, and every time it meets with Pluto, because it's like the
Hmm.
granddaughter meeting with the grandmother.
Beautiful.
What needs to be what really needs to be seen, released, and noted, expressed, and come to light, because it
Yeah,
will.
yeah, yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. No, and you know, you and I are both deeply appreciative of the moon moving through the sky every 30 days and the different ways it touches in on the various signs and the various houses, and how those uh, unfold in rich narratives, not only for like the mundane world experience astrologically, but also in our personal lives, you know. And one thing that I really feel strongly about is that um, every single one of these transits that we're talking about is also a calling for us to look at how our own personal mythological journey, it can be empowering and can help us enrich ourselves in our hero's journey. And so we can look at the moon coming through and conjuncting Pluto and being like, well, what is revealed here? And then how do we use that to empower ourselves? The moon will be full in Capricorn, and Capricorn is our sense of um, self-assuredness, our own personal inner core of strength that represents the bones. It's what holds us up. So then it's an illumination into what is our power to hold ourselves up in the world, no matter what the mythological stories the world's going through is. because that's what's important is we have to be an authentic self to ourselves and not get caught up in the theater of like, okay, well, this happened to President Trump, and this is happening to Biden, and and lose ourselves in that theater, lose our power to the theater, to the mediated theater, because whether we're calling it, just the gods playing out their tropes mythologically, or whether we're calling it like a political or corporate manipulation, it doesn't in the end matter. We're responsible for our own authenticity as we move through life. And I think that's one of that is the power that astrology gives us. When you have a reading from a good astrologer like Mario or myself, that's how you're feeling empowered. That's how you're going to get empowered. And I personally believe very strongly that that's more valuable than whether or not an astrologer, loosely predicted a difficult time for Trump last Friday or Saturday. What's more empowering and important is that when you look at these planets and transits, that you can take a narrative and a story home for yourself that then makes you feel more enriched in your life experience.
That's what it is. I've got nothing to add except an explication of that for each person's chart. Wherever it is you have in your chart, Capricorn, this marks your transition into your new journey, your new underworld journey into wherever Aquarius is in your chart. And that's where you're at, and stand strong, as Dorje noted, with that solidity of self and authenticity that you found in Capricorn, that you found in your bones, and move with that in your journey through Aquarius.
Ah, beautiful. Well, thank you. And, just to kind of conclude, my name is Dorje Kirsten. I'm a professional astrologer. You can find me at www.heartastrology.com. And Mario, where can they find you?
A 10 on my Plutonic Planes YouTube. That's all I have going right now until I get my website up. And I'll be doing readings again in September. And so yeah, thanks so much, Dorje.
Yeah, thank you.
Until
And
next
see
time.
you all next week.